A Viking warlord conquered England by the sword. Then he ruled it more peacefully than almost any king before him. This is the story of Cnut the Great and the empire he built across the North Sea that didn't survive him. By the time he died, he ruled England, Denmark, Norway, and parts of Sweden, the most powerful man in Europe after the emperor himself. Canut's story doesn't begin with him, it begins with a massacre. In 1002, English King Ethelred the Unready ordered the killing of Danish settlers across England in what became known as the St. Brice's Day Massacre. Among the many killed, according to later chroniclers, was the sister of the Danish king, an insult that could not go unanswered. Danish king Sweyn Forkbeard, Cnut's father, invaded England in response and by 1013 had forced Ethelred into exile. A young Canute sailed with his father on that campaign, his first real taste of conquest and of England itself. But Sweyn died just a year later in 1014 and Ethelred returned to reclaim his throne. Cnut's foothold in England had collapsed overnight. Rather than retreat, Cnut doubled down. In 1015, barely out of his teens, he raised his own fleet and sailed back to finish what his father started. For nearly a year, Cnut's forces fought their way across England. Wessex, then Northumbria, then finally the gates of London itself. Ethelred died during the siege of London in April 1016, leaving his son, Edmund Ironside, to carry on the fight alone. Edmund earned his nickname honestly. He fought Cnut to a standstill in battle after battle throughout that brutal summer. But in October 1016, the two armies met at the Battle of Asandun, and this time, Canut's forces broke the English lines completely. It was one of the bloodiest defeats in Anglo-Saxon history. Edmund survived, but his army and his leverage were shattered. The two kings negotiated a treaty, splitting England between them. Edmund keeping Wessex, Cnut ruling everything else. It didn't last long. Just weeks later, in November 1016, Edmund Ironside died, and Cnut became sole king of all England. He was still only in his 20s, and he had just inherited a kingdom that hated him. Winning a crown and keeping one, Canute quickly learned were two very different problems. His first move was ruthless. He redistributed the estates of English nobles he distrusted, handing their land to his own loyal soldiers instead. His second move was far more clever. In 1017, he married Emma of Normandy, the widow of the king he had just defeated. Emma wasn't just a former queen, her family ruled Normandy, giving Canute a direct diplomatic link to one of Europe's most powerful duchies. There was a complication. Cnut already had a wife in all but church recognition. Elfgifu of Northampton, mother to two of his sons. Rather than cast her aside completely, Cnut kept both relationships active, a political balancing act almost unheard of for the era. It was a decision that would eventually tear his empire apart after his death, but for now, it gave him allies on every side. Meanwhile, Cnut kept a private army of elite warriors, his housecarls, loyal only to him and paid directly from royal funds. In 1018, England paid the last and largest Danegeld ever collected, over 80,000 pounds of silver, to fund and dismiss much of his invasion fleet. That same year, Cnut's brother, the King of Denmark, died, and Cnut inherited a second crown without firing a single arrow. In less than 5 years, a Viking invader had become king of two nations through conquest, marriage, and remarkably careful politics. But holding England peacefully would take more than a crown. It would take an entirely new approach to ruling a conquered people. Most conquerors replace a nation's institutions. Cnut, remarkably, chose to preserve them. He kept the existing English shires, courts, and coinage system almost entirely intact, rather than imposing Danish structures over them. He issued law codes written in Old English with the help of Archbishop Wulfstan of York, blending Danish custom with existing Anglo-Saxon legal tradition. He divided the kingdom into powerful earldoms, appointing loyal nobles like Godwine, Leofric, and Siward to govern in his name. One of those earls, Godwine of Wessex, would rise so high under Canute that his own son would one day become King of England. Canute also worked hard to appear less like an occupier and more like a legitimate English king, attending church, funding monasteries, honoring English saints. He even funded a lavish new shrine for Edmund Ironside, the very rival he had defeated, a calculated act of reconciliation. The strategy worked. Chroniclers later noted that Cnut faced no serious internal rebellions during his entire reign, a rare feat for any medieval king. Trade flourished, English merchants gained new access to Scandinavian markets, and Scandinavian traders flowed freely into English ports. For the first time in decades, England experienced something it had almost forgotten: sustained peace. This is the part of Canute's story most people never hear. Not the Viking raider, but the surprisingly careful administrator. By the late 1020s, England had become the most stable it had been in over a generation. But Cnut wasn't finished. He had inherited one crown from his father and won a second through conquest. Now he set his sights on something his father never achieved: uniting the entire North Sea under a single crown. What came next would make him one of the most powerful rulers in the history of Europe. Cnut already ruled Denmark by inheritance. Norway was a very different matter entirely. Norway was ruled by King Olaf Haraldsson, a devout, uncompromising king who had made no shortage of enemies among his own nobles. Cnut didn't need to invade outright. He simply funded and encouraged Olaf's disillusioned nobles to turn against their own king. In 1028, Olaf fled Norway without a real fight, and Canute sailed in to claim the crown almost uncontested. Olaf attempted to reclaim his throne 2 years later, but died in battle in 1030, and was later canonized as Norway's patron saint. Canute now ruled England, Denmark, and Norway, with influence stretching into parts of Sweden as well. Historians later gave this vast, unofficial union a name: the North Sea Empire, one of the largest political unions in early medieval Europe. At its height, only the Holy Roman Emperor himself held more power in Western Europe than Canute did. He traveled constantly between his kingdoms, something almost no ruler before him had attempted on this scale. Managing 3 kingdoms at once meant Canute needed something else entirely: recognition and legitimacy on the biggest stage in Europe. For a Viking-born king, that meant one destination above all others: Rome, seat of the Holy Roman Church itself. In 1027, Canute set out on a journey that would define how history remembered him. Canute traveled to Rome to attend the imperial coronation of Conrad II, the new Holy Roman Emperor. It placed him, a former Viking raider, sitting among the most powerful Christian monarchs in all of Europe. While there, he negotiated something remarkably practical: reduced tolls along the roads leading to Rome for English pilgrims and merchants. He also arranged the marriage of his daughter to the future Holy Roman Emperor, tying his family directly into European royal bloodlines. Cnut wrote home describing his journey, one of the earliest surviving letters from an English king detailing a trip abroad. He donated lavish gifts to churches and shrines along the way, cementing his reputation as a devoutly Christian king. This mattered enormously. Much of what we know about Cnut come from monks and chroniclers, and generous kings tend to be remembered kindly. Back in England, Cnut used his newfound continental prestige to strengthen trade routes and church ties even further. By the early 1030s, Canute stood at the absolute height of his power, respected, wealthy, and remarkably secure. But it's this exact period of his life that gave rise to the most famous story ever told about him. Not a battle, not a coronation, a story about a king, a beach, and the incoming tide. It's a story almost everyone has heard, and almost everyone has gotten completely wrong. According to a story written a century after his death, Canute once ordered his throne carried to the seashore. His courtiers helped flattering him endlessly, claiming his power was so great even the sea itself would obey him. So Canute sat on his throne at the water's edge and commanded the rising tide to stop before it touched his feet. The tide, naturally, did not listen. It rose exactly as it always had, soaking his robes and his boots completely. Popular retellings today usually frame this as arrogance, a foolish king who believed he could command nature itself. But that's exactly backwards. According to the original account, Cnut knew perfectly well the tide would ignore him. He staged the entire moment deliberately, to humble his own flattering courtiers, not to prove his own power. Rising from his soaked throne, Cnut reportedly declared that true power over land and sea belongs to God alone. It was never a story about a foolish king. It was a lesson in humility, deliberately staged by a very smart one. On November 12th, 1035, King Canute died at Shaftesbury in southern England. He was buried in Winchester in a kingdom that, for nearly 2 decades, he had ruled without a single successful rebellion. But the empire he built was never an institution. It was held together by his personal relationships, and those didn't survive him. Norway rebelled almost immediately, restoring its old royal line within months of Canute's death. England and Denmark split between his 2 surviving sons, Harold Harefoot taking England, Harthacnut taking Denmark. Neither son possessed their father's political skill. Within 7 years, both of Canute's sons who held thrones were dead. In 1042, the old Anglo-Saxon royal line returned to the English throne through Edward the Confessor, Canute's stepson through Emma of Normandy. Ironically, it was Emma's Norman family connections that would resurface just 24 years later, when William of Normandy invaded England in 1066. The empire Canute spent his life building had fully unraveled within a single generation of his death. So what actually made Canute's reign so stable wasn't the empire at all, it was Canute himself. A Viking warlord who conquered by the sword, then ruled through marriage, patience, and remarkably careful diplomacy. Subscribe for more deep dives into history's forgotten kings, and tell us in the comments, was Cnut the greatest king England never fully remembers?